The broken glass crunched beneath paws that had once walked with honor, each step leaving crimson dots on the pristine snow like scattered memories of better days. Max's breath formed desperate clouds in the midnight air as he stood in Sarah Chen's shattered kitchen window, his German shepherd frame trembling not from the brutal Minneapolis cold, but from the weight of an impossible choice: turn away from the family that had cast him out just hours before, or risk everything to save the child whose terrified cries echoed from somewhere in the frozen darkness behind their house. Blood dripped from his torn paw onto the white linoleum, marking his crossing from the bitter world outside into the warm sanctuary of those who had branded him dangerous. His amber eyes, dulled by weeks of hunger and abuse, suddenly blazed with the fierce intelligence that had once made him Minneapolis PD's most decorated K-9 officer. What he did next would shatter everything they believed about loyalty, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 days earlier, the snow had begun falling like judgment on Minneapolis, blanketing the working-class neighborhood where dreams came small and bills came large. In a modest rental house on Elm Street, Sarah Chen pulled another double shift schedule from the refrigerator, her nurse's scrubs still carrying the antiseptic smell of Hennepin County Medical Center's ICU. At 34, she carried herself with the weary determination of a woman who had learned that life's promises were as fragile as the patients she fought to save each night. Her son Tommy, 8 years old with curious brown eyes, and his father's stubborn cowlick, sat at their second-hand kitchen table working through math homework with the focused intensity that reminded Sarah why she endured 16-hour shifts. The boy had his mother's resilience, having adapted to their new reality after his father walked out 2 years ago, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and a note about finding himself. Tommy never asked why Daddy left anymore, but Sarah caught him sometimes staring at the empty driveway where a second car used to park. Their neighborhood was the kind where neighbors knew each other's business but minded their own, where American flags hung from porches and children still played outside until street lights came on. Mrs. Rodriguez next door kept watch over Tommy when Sarah worked late, and Pastor Wilson from St. Mark's stopped by monthly to check on the young family navigating life's storms, as he diplomatically called their situation. 5 miles across the city, in a cluttered apartment that reeked of regret and cheap whiskey, Officer Bradley Morrison, former Officer Morrison, sat surrounded by the debris of a distinguished career. Police commendations hung crooked on walls marked by fist holes, while empty bottles created a shrine to 15 years of service that had ended in disgrace. At 42, Bradley looked like a man who had aged decades in mere months, his gray eyes haunted by ghosts that visited nightly. In the corner, on a blanket that had once been royal blue but now bore the stains of neglect, lay Max. The 5-year-old German shepherd's powerful frame had withered to show ribs beneath his once magnificent coat. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle, some from his years of police service, others far more recent and shameful in origin. His intelligent amber eyes tracked Bradley's movements with the wariness of an animal that had learned to fear the hand that once fed him with pride. Max had been Bradley's partner for 3 years, trained in search and rescue, bomb detection, and the fierce loyalty that made German shepherds legendary among law enforcement. Together they had served with distinction until that gray October morning when everything changed, when a school shooting shattered more than lives. It shattered Bradley's faith in everything he had believed about duty, honor, and the dogs who served beside them. Now, as December's brutal cold settled over Minneapolis, 3 lives hung in the balance of choices not yet made, truths not yet spoken, and a reckoning that would arrive with the next snowfall. The breaking point came on a Monday morning when the whiskey bottle spoke louder than conscience. Bradley Morrison sat in his government-subsidized apartment, staring at the pile of unopened mail that included his final disability check and a letter from the Minneapolis Police Department asking him to return his service weapon. The apartment felt like a tomb. Heavy curtains blocked the December sun, and the air hung thick with the smell of unwashed dishes and abandoned hope. Max approached with the careful steps of an animal who had learned to read human moods like a survival manual. In his mouth, he carried the leather leash that had once been a symbol of partnership, now worn thin from months of desperate hope. His tail gave the slightest wag, a remnant of the joy that had once defined their relationship when they were a team, when they mattered to each other and the world. "Get away from me," Bradley muttered, his words slurred with the morning's first drink. But Max persisted, dropping the leash at his former partner's feet with the gentle precision that had once made him the department's most reliable K9. The dog's amber eyes held no reproach, only the unwavering loyalty that had never wavered despite the changes in their circumstances. The sight of that faithful face triggered something dark in Bradley's alcohol-soaked mind. Suddenly, he wasn't seeing Max in their shabby apartment. He was back in Jefferson Elementary School, hearing the gunshots, watching his partner, Officer Rebecca Santos, fall while Max failed to alert them to the shooter who had been hiding in the janitor's closet. The memory played like a broken record, over and over. Max's hesitation, Rebecca's scream, the blood spreading across the polished hallway floor. "It's your fault," Bradley whispered, the words growing louder with each repetition. "Your fault she's dead. Your fault I'm here. Your fault!" His hand struck Max across the muzzle with the force of 15 years of buried rage. The dog yelped, but didn't retreat, didn't snap back, only lowered his head in submission. The sight of Max's acceptance only fueled Bradley's fury. Another blow, this one to the ribs, sent the German Shepherd stumbling. "You're worthless!" Bradley screamed, grabbing Max by the collar and dragging him toward the door. "Worthless piece of... Rebecca died because you couldn't do your job." He threw open the apartment door, the December cold rushing in like a judgment. Without ceremony, without the dignity that a service animal deserved, Bradley shoved Max into the hallway and slammed the door. Through the thin walls, he could hear Max's confused whining, the scratch of claws on cheap linoleum as the dog tried to understand why his world had just collapsed. For the next 48 hours, Max wandered through Minneapolis like a ghost of his former self. His training told him to seek help from humans, but his recent experience had taught him that humans were no longer safe. He tried the Thompson house first, drawn by the smell of cooking meat and the laughter of children playing in a heated basement. When Mrs. Thompson opened her door and saw the bedraggled German Shepherd on her porch, she grabbed her husband's golf club. "Get away! Shoo! We don't need strays here," she shouted, swinging the club in Max's direction. The dog backed away immediately, his training overriding any instinct to defend himself. Good dogs don't bite. Good dogs obey. Good dogs endure. The Miller household proved no more welcoming. Their small terrier mix set up such a racket when Max approached that Mr. Miller emerged with a garden hose, spraying the exhausted German Shepherd with freezing water. "Find somewhere else to be a problem," he yelled over his dog's frantic barking. "Even son." Mark's church, where Max sought shelter in the covered entrance, offered no sanctuary. Pastor Wilson found him there Tuesday morning, curled against the heavy wooden doors like a supplicant seeking absolution. The kindly minister knelt beside Max, his heart breaking at the sight of the magnificent animal reduced to such desperation. "Oh, you poor soul," Pastor Wilson whispered, noting the fresh wounds and the visible ribs beneath the matted coat. "I wish I could help you, but the church council, they have rules about animals." He placed a gentle hand on Max's head, feeling the tremor that ran through the dog's body. Lord, forgive us for turning away your creatures when they need us most. By Thursday evening, Max had been walking for 3 days through a city that seemed determined to prove that loyalty was a one-way street. His paws were cracked and bleeding from the frozen sidewalks, his stomach hollow with hunger, his spirit nearly broken by the endless rejections. When he saw the warm light spilling from the windows of 847 Elm Street, where Sarah Chen was making dinner for her son, Max gathered what remained of his courage and approached one more door, hoping against hope that this time might be different. The warm glow from the Chen family's kitchen window drew Max like a beacon through the gathering dusk. 8-year-old Tommy was in the front yard, building a snow fort with the determined concentration that children bring to their most important projects. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, and his breath formed little puffs of excitement as he packed snow into sturdy walls that would defend against imaginary enemies. Max approached slowly, his natural caution heightened by 3 days of rejection. But there was something different about this child, something in Tommy's immediate reaction that stirred memories of better times. Instead of running or screaming, Tommy looked up from his snow fort with wide, curious eyes and whispered, "Oh, wow, you're beautiful." The boy took a tentative step forward, extending one mittened hand. "Are you lost, big guy? You look so tired." Max's tail gave the slightest wag, the first sign of hope he had felt since leaving Bradley's apartment. Tommy's voice held no fear, only the pure compassion that adults seem to lose somewhere along the way to growing up. "Mom!" Tommy called toward the house, his voice bright with discovery. "Mom, come look! There's a hurt dog out here!" Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway, still wearing her scrubs from the morning shift, a dish towel draped over her shoulder. Her trained nurse's eye immediately assessed the situation. A large, potentially dangerous animal in proximity to her vulnerable child. Every protective instinct that had been honed by 2 years of single motherhood flared to life. "Tommy, get away from that dog right now," she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "Come inside this instant." But Tommy was already kneeling in the snow beside Max, his small hands gently examining the cuts on the dog's muzzle. "Mom, look at his wounds. Someone hurt him really bad. Can we help him?" "Please?" Sarah's heart clenched at the sight, but her mind calculated risks with clinical precision. German shepherds were powerful animals, and this one looked desperate, possibly rabid or aggressive from pain and hunger. She had seen too many trauma cases in the ER. Children mauled by dogs whose behavior had been misread by well-meaning families. "Thomas Chen, you get away from that animal right now." Sarah's voice carried the authority of a mother who had spent sleepless nights worrying about every possible danger that could befall her son. She stepped onto the porch, her body positioned to shield Tommy if the dog attacked. Max sensed the woman's fear and slowly backed away, his head lowered in the submissive posture that had been trained into him. He had learned to read human emotions like weather patterns, and Sarah's terror was unmistakable. Despite his hunger and exhaustion, his training overrode everything else. Do not threaten humans, especially children. "But Mom, he's not mean," Tommy protested, even as he reluctantly moved toward the house. "Look at his eyes. He's just scared and hungry." Sarah grabbed her son's arm, pulling him firmly toward the door. "You don't know what diseases he might carry, what he might do if he feels cornered. Wild animals are unpredictable, Tommy. I won't risk your safety for any stray." The word stray hit Max like a physical blow. He had been many things, partner, protector, guardian, but never a stray. Yet here he was, homeless and unwanted, reduced to begging for scraps of kindness from strangers who saw only danger in his presence. Sarah disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a worn broom, wielding it like a weapon. "Go on, get out of here. Find somewhere else to be." She advanced on Max, swinging the broom in wide arcs that forced him to retreat toward the street. "We don't want you here. Leave us alone." Each word struck Max with devastating precision. He had been rejected before, but this felt different, more final somehow. The woman's fear was so palpable, so absolute, that it left no room for negotiation or understanding. He backed away slowly, his amber eyes never leaving hers, searching for any sign of the compassion he had seen in her son. Tommy pressed his face against the kitchen window, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the big dog disappear into the darkness. "Mom, that was wrong," he said quietly, his 8-year-old moral compass pointing true north. "He needed help, and we turned him away." Sarah felt the familiar weight of maternal guilt settle on her shoulders, but she pushed it aside. "I'm sorry, honey, but my job is to keep you safe. That's all that matters to me." She pulled the curtains closed, blocking out the sight of Max's retreating figure and the accusation in her son's eyes. Outside, Max found shelter beneath an abandoned car 2 blocks away, curling his body against the wind that cut through his thin coat like knives. The temperature was dropping toward the dangerous zone where even a German shepherd's endurance had limits. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the warmth of memories, days when he had mattered, when his presence brought comfort instead of fear. But sleep would not come easily that night. Something nagged at his consciousness, a distant sound that his trained ears recognized even through the howling wind. Somewhere in the darkness, carried on the winter air, came the faint sound of a child's voice calling for help. Max lifted his head, every instinct alert, every fiber of his being responding to a cry that no one else seemed to hear. The same child who had shown him kindness was in trouble. The accident happened at 8:30 p.m., just as Sarah was finishing the dinner dishes and congratulating herself on another crisis successfully navigated. Tommy had been unusually quiet since the incident with the dog, picking at his mac and cheese and responding to her attempts at conversation with monosyllabic answers that carried the weight of disappointment. "I'm going to check my snow fort before bed," Tommy announced, already reaching for his winter coat hanging by the back door. "Absolutely not," Sarah replied without looking up from the sink. "It's dark, it's cold, and you're not going outside alone at night. Your fort will still be there tomorrow." But Tommy Chen possessed the stubborn streak that had helped his mother survive 2 years of single parenthood, and at 8 years old he had not yet learned that some rules were negotiable while others were carved in stone. While Sarah answered a work call from the hospital about her weekend shift schedule, Tommy slipped on his boots and quietly opened the back door. The yard looked different in the darkness, transformed from a familiar playground into something mysterious and adventurous. Tommy's snow fort stood like a miniature castle against the back fence, and he felt a surge of pride at his architectural achievement. But as he approached to make one final adjustment to the wall, his foot found the wooden cover of the old root cellar that had been hidden beneath the day's fresh snowfall. The cover, rotted by decades of Minnesota winters and weakened by the weight of accumulated snow, gave way with a sound like breaking bones. Tommy fell 8 feet into the stone-lined chamber that had once stored vegetables for the home's original owners in the 1940s. His small body hit the earthen floor with a sickening thud, and his cry of pain echoed off the walls like a prayer sent into an empty cathedral. Above ground, Sarah discovered Tommy's absence at exactly 9:00 p.m. when she went to tell him it was time for his bath. The open back door sent ice through her veins colder than any Minnesota winter. "Tommy!" she called, her voice cracking with the special terror reserved for parents who realize their worst fears are materializing. "Tommy, where are you?" She grabbed a flashlight and searched every corner of their small yard, calling his name with increasing desperation. The snow had begun falling again, heavy flakes that would soon erase any tracks he might have left. When 15 minutes passed without finding him, Sarah's training as an ICU nurse kicked in. Assess, prioritize, act. She dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "My son is missing," she told the dispatcher, forcing herself to speak clearly despite the panic clawing at her chest. "He's 8 years old, brown hair, blue winter coat. He was in our backyard, and now he's gone." The dispatcher's voice was professionally calm. "Ma'am, we're experiencing multiple weather-related emergencies tonight. We'll have officers there as soon as possible, but it may be 30 to 40 minutes. Have you checked with neighbors?" 30 to 40 minutes. In this cold, with the temperature dropping toward 20 below zero, 30 minutes could be the difference between finding Tommy safely and finding him too late. Sarah began a frantic canvass of the neighborhood, pounding on doors and rousing neighbors who joined the search with the instinctive solidarity of people who understood that lost children belonged to everyone. 200 yards away, beneath the rusted frame of an abandoned Oldsmobile, Max lifted his head from his paws. His ears, trained by years of police work to distinguish between ordinary sounds and calls for help, had detected something that the wind and snow had hidden from human ears. Faint but unmistakable, carried on the air like a thread of hope, came the sound of a child crying. Max knew that cry. It belonged to the boy who had looked at him with kindness instead of fear, who had seen beauty where others saw only danger. Every fiber of his being, every instinct, honed by years of search and rescue training, responded to that sound with the precision of a tuning fork struck by a master musician. He crawled out from beneath the car, his body protesting after hours of exposure to the brutal cold. His paws were numb, his joints stiff, but his mind was crystal clear with purpose. This was what he had been trained for, what he had been born for. Finding people who were lost, saving lives that hung in the balance. Following the sound with the methodical precision that had made him Minneapolis PD's most decorated K9, Max traced Tommy's scent through the neighborhood. The trail led him back to the Chen property, past the front yard where he had first encountered kindness, around to the back where the snow had already begun to fill in the depression that marked the collapsed cellar cover. Max's nose told him the story. Tommy had fallen through the rotted wood into the underground chamber. The scent was strong here, mixed with fear and pain, and the metallic tang of blood from what Max's experienced nose diagnosed as a minor injury. But the cold was the real enemy now. Even a small hurt could become deadly when combined with hypothermia. Max began to bark. Not the panicked yapping of an ordinary dog, but the controlled, purposeful bark that he had been trained to use when signaling a find. The sound carried across the snowy yards, cutting through the wind with the authority of professional communication, but instead of bringing help, his barking brought terror. Sarah heard the sound and felt her blood freeze. The same dog she had driven away hours earlier was back, and now Tommy was missing. In her panicked state, her mind made connections that logic would have rejected. The dog had taken her son, was calling to pack mates, was announcing his kill. She appeared at the back door with a baseball bat, her face twisted with a mother's rage. "What did you do to my son?" she screamed at Max, advancing across the yard with the bat raised above her head. "Where is he? What did you do?" Max backed away from her fury, confused by her response. In his experience, humans were grateful when he located missing people. But this human seemed to think he was the threat, not the solution. He tried again, barking and looking pointedly at the collapsed cellar cover, then back at Sarah, hoping she would understand the communication that had always worked with his police partners. "Get away from here!" Sarah swung the bat in wide arcs, her desperation making her dangerous. "I'm calling the police." "They'll shoot you for what you've done." In the distance, sirens began to wail as the first emergency responders finally became available to respond to Sarah's call. But Max knew that by the time they arrived, by the time they organized a search, by the time they brought the right equipment, it might be too late for the child whose cries were growing weaker in the underground chamber. Tommy's voice drifted up from below the earth like a ghost's whisper. "Help me, please. So cold." Max's decision crystallized in that moment. Sarah would never trust him, would never understand what he was trying to communicate. But trust was a luxury that rescue work could not afford. Sometimes heroes had to act despite the hatred of those they sought to save. The kitchen window was old, single-paned glass that had survived decades of Minnesota winters. Max studied it for a moment, calculating angle and force the way he had been trained to breach doors during high-risk arrests. Then, gathering what remained of his strength, he launched himself through the air. The crash of breaking glass shattered the winter night like an explosion. Max landed in a shower of glittering fragments, his body rolling across the kitchen linoleum as Sarah's screams of terror filled the house. Blood from a dozen small cuts darkened his coat, but his amber eyes burned with unwavering purpose. He had crossed the line from which there was no return. Whatever happened next, he would save the child who had shown him kindness, even if it cost him everything. Glass crunched beneath Max's bleeding paws as he landed in Sarah Chen's kitchen, his powerful body absorbing the impact with the practiced grace of a professional who had breached countless barriers in service to the law. Blood from a dozen cuts painted crimson streaks across the white linoleum, but his amber eyes held no aggression, only the fierce determination of a rescue dog who had found his purpose again. Sarah's screams pierced the night air as she stumbled backward, the baseball bat clattering from her nerveless fingers. "Help! Someone help me!" she cried, grabbing her phone with shaking hands to dial 911 again. "The dog! He's broken into my house! He's going to attack!" But Max made no move toward her. Instead, he limped directly to the back door, his nose pressed against the glass as he whined with increasing urgency. He looked back at Sarah, then at the door, then back again. The same clear communication signal he had used hundreds of times with his police partners when indicating the location of suspects or evidence. "Get away from me!" Sarah shouted, pressing herself against the far wall. "Stay back!" But even in her terror, something about the dog's behavior penetrated her panic. He wasn't stalking her, wasn't showing any signs of predatory aggression. Instead, he seemed to be trying to tell her something. From somewhere outside, carried on the wind like a message from another world, came the sound that changed everything. Tommy's voice, weak and muffled, calling for help. "Mom, Mom, I'm hurt. Can't get out." Sarah's maternal instincts overrode her fear in an instant. She rushed to the back door, flinging it open and following Max as he bounded toward the collapsed cellar cover. Her flashlight beam illuminated the depression in the snow, the broken wood scattered around the opening like the remains of a shattered promise of safety. "Tommy!" she called down into the darkness. "Tommy? Are you hurt? Mom!" Tommy's voice echoed from 8 feet below, thick with tears and cold. "I fell through the wood. My ankle really hurts, and I'm so cold. I can't climb out. The walls are too slippery." Sarah dropped to her knees beside the opening, her flashlight revealing her son huddled at the bottom of the stone-lined chamber. His lips were already showing the blue tinge of hypothermia, and his small body was shaking violently from the cold. The earthen floor was wet from melted snow, and ice was beginning to form on the stone walls. "Hold on, baby," Sarah called down to him. "The police are coming. They'll get you out." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they might not arrive in time. The temperature was dropping toward dangerous levels, and Tommy's winter coat, while adequate for playing outside, was not designed for prolonged exposure to these conditions. She could hear it in his voice, the slurring that indicated his core temperature was beginning to drop to critical levels. Max appeared beside her, studying the situation with the analytical eye of a professional. He had handled dozens of rescue scenarios during his police career, and his trained assessment was immediate and accurate. The child was in imminent danger, the walls were too icy for a human to climb safely, and traditional rescue equipment would arrive too late. Without hesitation, Max began his descent into the cellar. His claws found purchase on the rough stone walls, and his powerful hindquarters controlled his descent with the same precision he had once used to scale fences in pursuit of fleeing suspects. Within seconds, he was at the bottom of the chamber, his warm body pressing against Tommy's trembling form. "Max!" Tommy whispered, his voice filled with wonder even through his pain. "You came back! You came back to help me!" His small arms wrapped around the dog's neck, and Max felt the child's violent shivering begin to subside slightly as his body heat provided crucial warmth. Above them, Sarah watched in amazement as the dog she had branded dangerous positioned himself as a living shield between her son and the worst of the cold. Max's body language was completely focused on Tommy's welfare, checking him for injuries with gentle sniffs, then lying down to provide maximum contact with his warm fur. "Can you help me get him out?" Sarah called down to Max, her voice breaking with emotion. "Can you help him climb?" Max looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and Sarah saw something there that took her breath away. Not the mindless aggression she had feared, but the focused intelligence of a trained professional assessing options and formulating a plan. Max positioned himself beneath Tommy, allowing the child to use his broad back as a stepping stone. But Tommy's injured ankle couldn't support his weight, and his small hands, numb with cold, couldn't grip the icy stone walls. After several failed attempts, it became clear that Tommy lacked the strength to climb out on his own. Sarah made the decision that would haunt and inspire her for the rest of her life. "I'm coming down," she announced, stripping off her heavy winter coat. "Max, you'll have to help both of us get out." The descent was treacherous, made more dangerous by the icy conditions and her own fear. But Sarah's love for her son overcame every other consideration. When she reached the bottom, she found Tommy wrapped in Max's protective embrace, the dog's body heat providing the crucial warmth that was keeping hypothermia at bay. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," Sarah said, her nurse's training taking over despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Max, you go up first. Tommy, you're going to climb on my back, and I'll follow Max up. Can you do that for me, baby?" Max seemed to understand the plan immediately. He scrambled up the stone walls with remarkable agility for a dog his size, his claws finding purchase on irregularities that human hands couldn't grip. Once at the top, he positioned himself as an anchor point, his powerful body braced against the opening. Sarah boosted Tommy onto her back, feeling his small arms lock around her neck with desperate strength. The climb was the most terrifying physical challenge of her life, every handhold uncertain, every step a potential fall that could injure them both. But Max's presence above them provided both psychological comfort and practical assistance, his strong jaws gently gripping Tommy's coat to help pull him up the final few feet. When they finally emerged from the cellar, all three collapsed in the snow, gasping from exertion and relief. Tommy immediately crawled to Max, burying his face in the dog's fur while Sarah wrapped them both in her coat. The sirens were getting closer now, but they were no longer racing against time. They were celebrating a rescue that had been accomplished through the most unlikely partnership imaginable. "Thank you," Sarah whispered to Max, her voice thick with tears she couldn't stop. "Thank you for saving my son." Max simply laid his head on Tommy's chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that confirmed life preserved, duty fulfilled, purpose restored. The first light of Friday morning brought more than dawn to the Chen household. It brought Officer Bradley Morrison standing on their front porch with the hollow-eyed look of a man who had spent the night wrestling with demons both real and imagined. The local news had run the story of Tommy's rescue, and the brief mention of a heroic German shepherd had sent Bradley into a spiral of recognition and rage that only alcohol could numb. Sarah answered the door in her bathrobe, still exhausted from the previous night's ordeal. Tommy was inside, his sprained ankle elevated and wrapped, but otherwise miraculously unharmed thanks to Max's quick intervention. The dog himself lay beside the boy's makeshift bed on the living room couch, his wounds from the broken glass cleaned and bandaged by Sarah's practiced medical hands. "That's my dog," Bradley announced without preamble, his breath carrying the sharp scent of whiskey, despite the early hour. His police-issued jacket hung loose on his diminished frame, and his once proud posture had collapsed into the slouch of defeat. "The one that saved your kid, he belongs to me." Sarah stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her to shield Tommy from the angry stranger's presence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said carefully, her nurse's training helping her recognize the signs of someone in psychological crisis. "That dog was homeless, hurt, and starving when he found us." "Found you?" Bradley's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Lady, that dog is a trained police K9. Officer Morrison and Max, Unit 47. We served together for 3 years until—" His voice trailed off, the words catching in his throat like broken glass. "Until what?" Sarah demanded, her protective instincts flaring as she thought of the gentle animal who had risked everything to save her son. "Until you decided to abuse him and throw him out in the cold to die?" Bradley's face darkened with the storm clouds of suppressed guilt. "You don't understand what you're talking about. That dog is dangerous. He's a coward who got my partner killed. Rebecca Santos died because Max failed to do his job, failed to alert us to the threat." The accusation hung in the cold air like a curse, but Sarah had seen Max's behavior firsthand. She had witnessed his courage, his intelligence, his unwavering commitment to protecting Tommy even after being rejected and abused. "I don't believe you," she said flatly. "That dog is a hero. He saved my son's life." "Heroes don't get people killed," Bradley shouted, his composure finally cracking. "Heroes don't hesitate when lives are on the line. Rebecca trusted him, trusted me, and now she's dead because of his weakness." Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the raised voices and the obvious distress of the situation. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in her doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. The Thompson family had emerged from their house, and even Pastor Wilson was approaching from down the street, having been alerted by the commotion. Inside the house, Max lifted his head at the sound of Bradley's voice. His entire body began to tremble, not from cold this time, but from the deep psychological trauma that Bradley's presence triggered. Tommy noticed immediately, his small hand moving to stroke Max's head in a gesture of comfort that the boy had learned from watching his mother care for patients. "It's okay, Max," Tommy whispered. "You're safe now. You're with family." But the dog's distress was becoming more pronounced. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His pupils dilated with fear, and he began to pant despite the cool temperature in the house. These were the classic signs of post-traumatic stress that Sarah recognized from treating combat veterans in the hospital's psychiatric wing. Bradley's demands escalated as the crowd of neighbors grew. "I want my dog back. He's registered to me, and I have the papers to prove it." He waved a crumpled document from his jacket pocket, his hands shaking with emotion and withdrawal. "That animal belongs to me." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her small frame belying the strength in her voice. "I've been watching you for months, Morrison. I've seen you hit that poor dog, heard you screaming at him in your apartment. Don't you dare come here demanding anything." "You don't know what you're talking about, old woman," Bradley snarled, but his words lacked conviction. The guilt he had been drowning in alcohol was rising to the surface, exposed by the daylight and the witnessing eyes of the community. Pastor Wilson approached with the careful steps of a man accustomed to navigating human crisis. "Bradley, son, you need help. This isn't about the dog. This is about the pain you're carrying. Let us help you." "I don't need help," Bradley's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "I need people to understand that Dog is worthless. He failed when it mattered most, and now everyone thinks he's some kind of hero." The crowd was growing larger, and phones were beginning to appear as neighbors documented the confrontation. Someone had already called the police, and sirens could be heard in the distance. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control, but the real tragedy was unfolding inside the house where Max cowered against Tommy, reliving traumas that no animal should ever have to endure. Sarah looked at the broken man on her porch, at the gathering crowd, at the approaching police cars, and made a decision that would change all their lives. "You want to know about heroes?" she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Heroes don't blame innocent animals for human failures. Heroes don't abuse the ones who trust them most. And heroes certainly don't abandon their partners when they need help." Bradley's face went pale as the implications of her words hit him. The neighbors' expressions shifted from confusion to understanding to disgust as they realized what kind of man they were dealing with. In trying to reclaim Max, Bradley had exposed himself as everything that Max was not: a coward, an abuser, a man who destroyed rather than protected. The approaching police cars represented more than law enforcement. They carried the weight of judgment that would finally separate the true hero from the broken man who had created him. The Minneapolis Police Department patrol car that pulled up to the Chen residence carried more than just responding officers. It brought Detective Maria Santos, Rebecca's younger sister, who had requested the assignment the moment she heard Bradley Morrison's name on the radio. The irony was not lost on her that she would be investigating the man whose lies had destroyed the reputation of the dog who might have saved her sister's life. Officer Jennifer Martinez stepped out first, her practiced eye immediately assessing the volatile situation. Bradley stood swaying slightly on the porch, his disheveled appearance and alcohol-tinged breath telling a story that needed no explanation. The gathering crowd of neighbors spoke in hushed tones, their body language clearly indicating which side of this conflict held their sympathy. "Mr. Morrison," Detective Santos said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of personal loss and professional authority. "I think we need to have a conversation about what really happened at Jefferson Elementary School." Bradley's face went ashen at the sound of her voice. Rebecca Santos had been more than his partner. She had been his closest friend, the person who had believed in him when his own family had given up. Facing her sister now, with the truth hanging between them like a sword, was a confrontation he had spent months trying to avoid. "Maria," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the winter wind. I can explain everything." "Can you?" Detective Santos pulled out a tablet, swiping to a file that Bradley recognized with growing horror. "Because I've spent the last 6 months reviewing every piece of evidence from that day. Every surveillance video, every witness statement, every second of body camera footage." The crowd fell silent as Detective Santos began her methodical destruction of the lie that had consumed Bradley's life. The school's security cameras show Max alerting to the janitor's closet 37 seconds before the first shot was fired. He was pulling toward that door, whining, showing every sign of detection that he was trained to display. Bradley's knees nearly buckled as the truth he had buried under mountains of guilt and alcohol was dragged into the harsh light of dawn. No, that's not. Rebecca didn't understand what he was trying to tell us." "Rebecca understood perfectly," Detective Santos continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "The body camera footage shows her acknowledging Max's alert. She said, and I quote, 'Good boy, Max. Bradley, he's indicating the closet.' But you overrode her judgment. You said it was probably just cleaning supplies." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the winter wind seemed to hold its breath as the assembled neighbors absorbed the magnitude of Bradley's deception, not just to them, but to himself. Sarah Chen stepped forward from her position by the door, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade of truth. "You blame that innocent animal for your own mistake. You destroyed him because you couldn't face what you had done." Bradley's carefully constructed wall of denial finally crumbled completely. I couldn't live with knowing it was my fault she died. Rebecca trusted me, and I failed her. I failed everyone. Tears streamed down his face as years of suppressed guilt poured out. Max was trying to save her, and I was too arrogant to listen, too sure of myself to trust his training. Officer Martinez had been quietly documenting the scene, but now she spoke with the authority of law enforcement addressing a crime. "Mr. Morrison, we've had multiple reports of animal abuse from neighbors in your building. Mrs. Rodriguez has provided us with dates, times, and photographic evidence of injuries to the animal in question. Additionally," Detective Santos added, consulting her notes, "the department's veterinary specialist examined Max last night at Miss Chen's request. His findings indicate chronic malnutrition, evidence of repeated physical trauma, and psychological damage consistent with ongoing abuse." The legal case was building around Bradley like prison walls, but the real judgment was coming from something far more powerful. The eyes of the community that had watched him destroy the very animal that had tried to be his salvation. Pastor Wilson stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Bradley, you've been carrying this burden alone for too long, but punishing Max won't bring Rebecca back. It won't change what happened that day. All it does is create more victims." Inside the house, Tommy had been listening to the commotion through the window, his young mind processing the adult complexities with the clarity that children sometimes possess. "Max," he whispered to the trembling dog beside him, "that man is sick, isn't he? He's sick in his heart, and he hurt you because he was hurting." Max's amber eyes met Tommy's brown ones, and in that moment, a communication passed between them that transcended species, an understanding of pain, forgiveness, and the choice to move forward despite the wounds that others had inflicted. The decisive moment came when Detective Santos played the audio from Rebecca's body camera, her final words, spoken just before the shooter emerged from the closet that Max had been trying to warn them about. "Good boy, Max. You did your job perfectly. I love you both." Bradley collapsed to his knees in the snow, his sobs echoing across the yard like the sound of a soul finally breaking open. She said she loved us both, and I threw him away. I threw away the last thing she loved." The crowd watched in silence as a man confronted the full weight of his failures. Some felt pity, others felt justice, but all understood that they were witnessing a moment of reckoning that had been years in the making. Officer Martinez made the formal announcement that everyone had been expecting. "Mr. Morrison, you're under investigation for animal cruelty. You'll need to come with us for questioning. As for the custody of the animal, given the evidence of abuse and abandonment, the court will likely award custody to Ms. Chen, who has demonstrated proper care and commitment to the animal's welfare." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness as she watched Bradley being helped to his feet by Pastor Wilson. Justice was being served, but she couldn't help thinking about the tragedy that had created this situation. Two good people and a loyal dog, all destroyed by one moment of human error and the pride that prevented its acknowledgement. As the police cars prepared to leave, Bradley looked back at the house, where Max was recovering from wounds that Bradley himself had inflicted. "Tell him," he called to Sarah, his voice breaking. "Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him Rebecca was right. He was a good boy. He was always a good boy." The cars pulled away, taking Bradley toward whatever justice and redemption awaited him. But they left behind something more valuable than the resolution of a legal case. They left the truth that would allow healing to begin for both Max and the community that had witnessed his transformation from victim to hero. In the house, Tommy hugged Max tighter, whispering words of comfort to the dog who had saved his life. "You're home now, Max. You're safe, and you're loved, and nobody will ever hurt you again." 6 months later, the Minneapolis family court was filled with an unusual warmth for a legal proceeding as Judge Patricia Walters prepared to finalize the most unconventional adoption case of her 30-year career. Sarah Chen sat in the front row wearing her best dress, Tommy beside her in a crisp button-down shirt, and between them, wearing a brand-new service vest, sat Max, no longer the broken, starving animal who had stumbled into their lives during that December snowstorm, but a confident, healthy German shepherd whose amber eyes held the peace that comes from finding one's true home. The courtroom was packed with supporters who had followed Max's story through the local media coverage that had turned the rescue into a symbol of redemption and second chances. Mrs. Rodriguez sat with the other neighbors who had witnessed Bradley's confrontation, while Pastor Wilson occupied a seat near the back, having just returned from visiting Bradley at the treatment facility where he was addressing his PTSD and alcoholism. "This is a most unusual proceeding," Judge Walters began, her voice carrying both authority and warmth. "Typically, we don't hold formal adoption hearings for animals. But given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the legal complexities surrounding Officer Morrison's voluntary surrender of custody, the court finds it appropriate to make this official." The legal proceedings had been surprisingly swift once Bradley entered treatment. In one of his first acts of genuine sobriety in months, he had signed papers formally relinquishing all rights to Max, with the stipulation that the dog be placed with the Chen family. It was, as his therapist noted, the first selfless decision Bradley had made since the day Rebecca died. Detective Santos, who had become an unofficial advocate for Max's case, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, the Minneapolis Police Department would like to go on record stating that Max's service record has been reviewed and corrected. He is officially recognized as a hero who performed his duties with distinction on the day Officer Rebecca Santos lost her life. His alerts were proper and professional. The failure was human, not canine." Tommy raised his small hand, and Judge Walters smiled. "Yes, young man. You have something to say?" "Your Honor," Tommy said in his clear 8-year-old voice, "Max isn't just getting a new family today. We're getting a new family member, too. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." The gallery murmured with appreciation as Tommy continued. "And he taught my mom that sometimes the things that look scary are actually the things that can save you. Max looked scary when he broke our window, but he was really saving my life." Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by her son's wisdom and the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Your Honor, if I may add something," she said, standing with the formal respect due to the court. 6 months ago, I judged Max by his appearance and his circumstances. I saw a large, desperate dog and assumed he was dangerous. But Max taught our family that love isn't about what someone looks like or where they come from. It's about what they choose to do when others need help." Judge Walters nodded thoughtfully. "Ms. Chen, you've demonstrated exemplary care for this animal, including extensive veterinary treatment, behavioral therapy, and integration into your family structure. The court's child psychologist has reported that your son has shown remarkable improvement in confidence and emotional stability since Max joined your household." The formal adoption papers were signed with ceremonial flair, each signature witnessed by the gathered community that had followed Max's transformation. But the real celebration began when Tommy pulled out a surprise he had been saving for this moment. A new collar for Max, engraved with words that brought tears to every eye in the courtroom. "Max Chen, hero, protector, beloved son. As they left the courthouse, the late spring sunshine seemed to bless their new beginning. Max walked between Sarah and Tommy with the confident gait of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged, his head held high and his tail wagging with genuine happiness for the first time in months. The surprise waiting at home was even more meaningful than the legal ceremony. Bradley Morrison stood on their front porch, but this was a different man than the one who had raged there 6 months earlier. Sober, in therapy, and carrying the weight of genuine remorse, he held a small wrapped package in his hands. "I hope it's okay that I came," Bradley said quietly, his voice steady but humble. "I wanted to. I needed to see him one more time, to say goodbye properly." Sarah studied his face, seeing the changes that sobriety and therapy had wrought. The angry desperation was gone, replaced by the quiet dignity of a man who was learning to live with his mistakes rather than hide from them. "Tommy, what do you think?" Tommy looked at Bradley with the serious consideration that children bring to moral questions. "Did you come to hurt Max?" "No," Bradley replied, kneeling to Tommy's eye level. "I came to tell him I'm sorry, and to tell him thank you for saving you, because that's what good dogs do." "That's what Max has always done." Max approached Bradley cautiously, his body language alert but not fearful. The months of love and security with the Chen family had healed more than his physical wounds. They had restored his confidence and his ability to trust his own judgment about people. Bradley opened the package to reveal Max's original police badge and service medals. "These belong to him," he said simply. "He earned them, and he should have them." He looked directly into Max's amber eyes. "I'm sorry, partner. You were always the better half of our team." Max accepted the gesture with the dignity that had always defined him, allowing Bradley to scratch behind his ears one final time before returning to Tommy's side. As Bradley walked away, Sarah called after him, "Bradley, are you going to be okay?" He turned back with something approaching a genuine smile. "I'm learning to be..." And knowing that Max is loved and safe, that helps more than you know. The Chen family watched him disappear around the corner, then turned toward their house, their home, where Max would spend the rest of his days surrounded by the love he had always deserved. The last crossing had been completed, from victim to hero, from abandoned to chosen, from broken to whole. In a world that often feels divided and cold, Max's story reminds us of the profound truth that love doesn't require perfection, it requires presence. When Sarah Chen first saw Max bleeding and desperate at her door, she made the same mistake we all make, judging by appearances rather than character. But Max's unwavering loyalty, even to those who rejected him, teaches us that the greatest heroes aren't those who never fall, but those who choose to rise and serve others despite their wounds. For those of us who've lived long enough to accumulate our own scars and disappointments, Max's journey from abandonment to belonging offers hope that it's never too late for second chances. His story proves that families aren't just born, they're chosen through acts of courage, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Whether we're the ones needing rescue or the ones called to be rescuers, Max shows us that purpose isn't lost when life breaks us. It's refined. In our later years, when society often sees only what we've lost rather than what we still have to give, Max's transformation reminds us that our capacity to love and be loved never expires. Sometimes our greatest contributions come not from our strength, but from our scars. What moment in your life taught you that love requires courage more than perfection? Have you ever discovered that someone you initially misjudged became one of your greatest blessings? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how second chances have shaped your journey.